Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh, and hi everybody. Welcome to PLG 704 Qualitative Research Methodology. I am Dr. Ija. I'm going to teach you today with our lecture entitled Qualitative Research Strategy and Design. So before we start with the lecture, let me ask you some questions. So what are the philosophical assumptions that underpin this approach? Meaning that when you want to do a qualitative study, questions that you need to ask is that what are the philosophical assumptions that underpin this approach? Of course, when we decide to run a research using a qualitative study, you have certain approach in your mind that you want to do. But anyhow, before you think of to use the approach, you need to ask questions to yourself. What is the nature of the research? And what is the methodological basis of this approach? How will it be operationalized? So these are common questions that researchers need to ask themselves first before proceed with a qualitative research methodology. And when it comes to the methodological questions, what would be the preferred approaches, the key aspect of research design? What would be the preferred methods of data collections? And you have to take consideration of the sampling that you use and the methods of obtaining the data. And of course, you need to think of what would be the preferred approaches to handling the data in terms of data analysis, as well as to maintain the rigorous of the data that you have been analyzed. So in qualitative research strategy and design, what your research is about is one key questions that you really need to answer. So in terms of the social reality, which referring to the ontological perspective, knowledge and evidence, in terms of your epistemological position, your broad research area, your intellectual puzzle and your research questions itself, and your aims and the purpose of your research. So finding a focus and knowing where you stand. So in a qualitative research methodology, there are actually several different kinds of strategy and design that we can use, which can suit the research questions and the aim of our purpose. So whenever you think of to choose a certain appropriate strategy and design, you yourself should know your ontological perspective, your epistemological position, what is your research area, and the intellectual puzzle in your research question, of course, your research question as well as the aim and the scope of your research. Only after that, you can choose whatever research strategy or design involving qualitative research. According to Mason J in year 2006, when you want to choose certain research strategy and design, you need to think creatively about the methods. You need to focus your thinking by charting links between methods and also the research question. Like in the previous slide, I said, whenever you want to choose a research design for your qualitative method, you have to make sure it is suitable for the research objective as well as the aim and the scope of your research. You cannot simply choose whatever research design that you wish for. No, because every research design is meant to answer certain research objective. Right, let's look at this example here. You have a research question, and the research question is, how is inheritance handled in ordinary families in Malaysia society? So maybe this particular question is in a field of genetic, or it maybe involve social science studies, So like I said again in the previous slide, your research question, of course, may representing your research area, right? So the question is, how is inheritance handled in ordinary families in Malaysia society? So you have to map carefully the research question with the data source and method. So here, the data source would be family members, and the methods that you're going to use to answer the research question is by interviewing the family members, because it involves the process of inheritance. Yeah, how does the inheritance been handled in ordinary families, and also possibly solicitors and other professionals. So to do this, you're gonna run an interview in order to get the answer for this particular research question. So the main sample, okay, the main data source will be the family members, where you're gonna use an interview method, and you're gonna interview as well the solicitors and other professionals. So beside this data source and method, in referring to this table, beside data source and method is justification. Why is it important for us to do a justification? Because whatever decision that we make in terms of the data source and method, we must justify carefully why did we choose the sample and why did we choose the method used in the qualitative research study. So interview, in this case, the method that we use is interview. So the justification of using interview, because interview will provide family members accounts of how they and their relatives have handled inheritance. So the interview with professional, blah, 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 you have to give a justification why you interview the professional as well in order to get the answer for the research question. Okay? So in this case, the researcher believed that by interviewing the family members, they will get a valuable, source, valuable source, where family members account of how they and their relative have handled inheritance. And another thing that you have to really consider is in terms of the ethical issue. What would be the ethical aspect that you have to handle while interviewing the family members, while interviewing the professional? So ethics in qualitative research strategy and design is very important for you to handle. So think strategically now and later. Think what happened before, what happened now, and what's going to happen later on. And using and integrating different methods and sources, deciding how to integrate the methods, and anticipating the process of data analysis and sampling, and finally evidence, quality, and substantiation. Okay, so now let's look at qualitative research in terms of the characteristics, right? So you start with general question or problem. No predefined hypothesis. There is no hypothesis constructed in a qualitative research, but in quantitative, you need to construct a hypothesis. You uses a purposeful sample. Okay, it's involving non-probability sampling. Okay, not a random one. It uses a relatively small sample because we use purposeful sample or convenient sampling in order to collect the sample or the participant involved in the qualitative research. Therefore, we don't require a lot or a huge number of sample for qualitative research. And data collected with semi-structured and unstructured instrument. Okay, usually we have it depends on what method you use to collect the data. If you use an interview, either a semi-structured or even unstructured interview protocol. If you have a checklist, okay, you can use a checklist, so on and so forth. It depends on what kind of methods you use to collect the data. And you present result descriptively. It must come from your verbatim transcript, and after that you need to present or you need to interpret the analysis descriptively. Descriptively means you have to describe. Okay, maybe you can describe with a little bit of numbers, but most of it in a text form. It utilize researchers' awareness of own orientation, biases, experiences that might affect data collection and also data interpretation. So a researcher plays an important role in a qualitative research. So this is qualitative research funnel approach. There are several types of approach in doing qualitative research. The first one is a funnel approach. Why is it a funnel approach? Because it comes from the broad view into narrow view. Yeah, so you start with the general research question, and then you go for collecting the data, narrower the research question, then again you collect the data, and you narrower the research question until you get the conclusion. Yeah, so from a big view or a general question, it's keep on narrowing throughout the data collection, so that the research question now become very specific, and at the end you get the conclusion. The second one, the second one is the inductive approach. So first one, we have the funnel approach. Okay, funnel means from broad to narrow, but in inductive approach, it's the other way around. It's in the form of pyramid, meaning from broad at the bottom, narrow is at the top. So funnel, the broad question is at the top and the narrow question is at the bottom, and throughout the process you've done several times of data collection. But in inductive approach, it's the other way around. Okay, you may begin with a specific narrow research question, you collect data, you broaden the question, you collect data, you broaden up the question, and finally you get the conclusion. Okay, so specific to narrow. But in funnel approach, from broad to narrow. But in inductive, from specific to broader, to broader question. Okay, and at the end you get the conclusion, right? These are types of qualitative research methods. There are historical, survey, case study, observational, and ethnography. So in this course, you're going to learn not so detailed about each of the qualitative research method, because you will have a special course to learn on what is case study and what is ethnography. So let's look at the first type of qualitative research methods, which is the historical research method. And what will be the potential problem arises if you wish to do historical qualitative research method is that limited to data already available. Okay, excessive reliance on secondary sources, uncertainty about authenticity and accuracy of sources, and lack of objectivity. So this is the potential problems that appear when you want to do a historical qualitative research methods. Yeah, which means that the data that you have is insufficient, so you want to collect more data. Yeah, and then excessive reliance on secondary sources, too many secondary sources, so you want to focus on your own sources, and uncertainty about authenticity and accuracy of sources. So the sources that you get is you're not certain with it and you think it's not authentic, so you want to gather more data regarding it. And of course, lack of objectivity. Second one is survey. So in quantitative, we have survey method. In qualitative research method also there is survey method. So what will be the purpose of doing survey in a qualitative? Mainly is to determine the current status of a population with respect to one or more variables, and can be qualitative or quantitative depending on the data that you sought. So survey can be quanti, can be also quali. So the process of doing the survey is the same and between quanti and qualitative, but it depends on how you analyze the data later on for your reporting, right? So let us now look at what would be the procedure of doing a survey and potential problems that you may encounter when you do a survey qualitative research methods. Right. The first one is involving the procedure of a survey is to define the problem or question. So potential problems is inadequate responses. Okay, when you define the problem or question, the procedure of doing survey is to define the problem or question and then formulate hypothesis, continuous throughout the study, right? Develop the instrument, include validation and also field tests. You collect the data and then finally you analyze the data. So this would be the same for quantitative as well as for qualitative research method. So the potential problems that you may encounter while doing the survey in a qualitative research method is that you may get inadequate response. Yeah, inclusion of unrelated items on questionnaire. Right, when you develop an instrument, you may encounter of inclusion of unrelated items on the questionnaire that you develop. Poorly worded items, maybe because of complex items. You may have a leading questions and assuming facts not necessarily in evidence. So these are the potential problems that usually researcher will face while doing a survey research method, either in quantitative as well as in the qualitative research method. But particularly for qualitative research method, these are the potential problems that you may encounter. Next one is case study. Yeah, case study as an example of qualitative research method. The purpose of case study is to determine the factors and relationship among the factors that have resulted in current behavior or status of subject. So focus is on a single subject or unit, could be multiple individuals. So for case study, your focus would be the nouns, yeah, the nouns that you wish to do research on. Maybe institution, maybe the village. You know, you have certain focus, yeah, in a single subject or unit, or could be multiple individuals. So what you need to do is to determine the factors and relationship among the factors that have resulted in current behavior or status of the subject. Okay? So the procedure, first you need to determine the case. So like I said, case is usually in the form of nouns. Individual, group, or environment, I mean it refers to a certain group, certain people, certain villages, certain town, yeah, to study. And determine the data collection strategies and data to be collected. You collect the data and after that you analyze the data. So of course in case study EDD course, yeah, we have a course involving case study in EDD. You will learn more about case study. So what will be the potential problems that you will encounter when you do a case study? Yeah, first, observer or researcher bias, because you only focus into certain individual, certain group, and certain environment only. Yeah, and you have certain factors that you want to do research on. Lack of generalizability, because like I said, it's all about focusing. So it will lack of generalizability. Requires extensive data collection. Yeah, so that's because it's zooming. That's why I put a microscope here, because it's zooming. Because from a broad perspective, you have focus into certain perspective or certain group or certain individual or certain environment. So that is why it is called a case study. You have certain focus that you wish for in answering your research question. Next one is an observational research method. So the purpose of doing observational research method is that to determine current status of a given phenomenon, to derive specific testable hypotheses that explain observed behavior. Yeah, so when you are doing observational qualitative research method, it's usually involving current status of given phenomena, and it is specific, and you want to observe certain behavior. So it may be used prior to quantitative study. So after you have done a quantitative study using a survey or experimental research design, next you will triangulate it with a qualitative research method using observational research method. So the procedure of doing observational research method is to determine the phenomena, yeah, to be observed, identify what specific behaviors do and do not match the target phenomenon, and after that you define the observation period, record the observation, and you analyze the data. So usually in observational, you have an observational checklist, yeah, in order to look at certain phenomena that you want to observe and identify what specific behaviors do and do not match the target phenomenon. Okay, and potential problems that you may encounter while doing this qualitative research method would be lack of observer reliability. Usually the observer would be yourself or other persons that you have assigned. Untrained observers, yeah. Inaccurate recording. Observer bias, okay. If the persons that you observe related to you, you may have an observer bias. Response set, halo effect, yeah, and observer bias again, right? And next, we have ethnography study. Yeah, ethnography research method. So, ethnography, of course, it comes from the words ethnics. Okay, it's a study of an ethnics usually. So, the purpose is to determine the factors and relationship among the factors that result in a subject current status in a setting natural to the subject. So, the key word for ethnography is natural to the subject. Yeah. So relies on extensive and detailed description. So if we compare ethnography and case study, ethnography is more detailed, where it needs extensive and detailed description regarding factors and relationship among the factors. Yeah. So the procedure of doing ethnography is to refine the problem and setting of interest, decide on most appropriate and effective level of participation, develop working hypothesis, determine initial data collection strategies, and collect data over time. Yeah. So you need to refine the problem and setting of interest, decide on most appropriate and effective level of participation, and develop working hypothesis. You don't have your own hypothesis that you build before you run your research. Yeah, and determine initial data collection strategies, and you can collect data over time. So what will be the potential problems that you may encounter while doing ethnography? Result can be difficult to analyze because you have so many data that you collected during the process of collecting the data. Findings are nearly impossible to replicate. Yeah, small sample size, generally fairly costly because you have to stay at that particular place for quite a long period of time, and for that, time consuming. Yeah, time consuming and cost you a lot of money, of course. Yeah. Next, we have the process of triangulation. Yeah, method to enhance the validity and reliability of qualitative research, enhances accuracy of your interpretation, and confirms that the data collected is not due to chance or circumstances. So what is actually triangulation? Is a process of how you triangulate between one data with another data, or one method with another methods. Yep. For example, collect data from multiple sources. Okay, you have so many sources, so you need to triangulate between the sources. Collect data in multiple ways of subject. Yeah. Collect different kind of data in multiple ways from multiple subjects. Okay. May interview teachers, principals, and parents. May interview and observe students. May review student, record, interview teachers, observe students. So these are examples for each of the triangulation process that I listed down here. So if you collect data from multiple sources, you may interview teachers, principal, and parents. You collect data in multiple ways from subject, you have interview, and you have observe the student, okay, from one subject, but different data collection method. And in this case, collect different kind of data in multiple ways from multiple subject. You review student record, interview teachers, observe students. So what you did is that you have many samples. Yeah, you have students, you have teachers. Okay, you may have the principal as your sample. So you have multiple subjects. So you need to triangulate all that. Yeah, in order to get the validity and validity and reliability of the data that you have collected. So this is triangulation process. Yeah. Not necessarily between 3, it can be between 2, between 4, between 5 data or subject. Yeah, multiple data collection strategies, kind of data, multiple data sources, data collection strategies, and multiple kinds of data subject, referring to data sources. So this is what you do in the process of triangulation. Okay. So in data analysis, the data generally collected in the form of field notes, diaries, audio and video tapes, copies of document, narrative description. So this is how you collect the data for your data analysis using qualitative. And the analysis that you use, some form of analysis usually take place at the same time data is being collected. Researchers seek to identify patterns or trends. So that's why you need to do a transcribe all the data that you gathered. And then you have to seek for identify patterns or trend. Okay. So that's all for our lecture today regarding research design in qualitative research method. Thank you very much.